At 3:17 a.m., on an offshore oil rig in the middle of the ocean, I got a message that shattered years of marriage. My wife Sarah left me by text saying she was moving in with Devin and attached a screenshot showing our bank account drained, $214,000 gone. I replied with one word, understood, and finished my shift like nothing had happened. What Sarah didn't know was that she had just declared war on someone who spent 20 years mastering military strategy. My name is Jake Thompson, 42 years old, a former Marine who, after 20 years of active duty, landed a job as a security specialist on oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. My wife Sarah and I had been married for 12 years, right after I left the military, and our life ran like clockwork. We lived in Corpus Christi, Texas, in a simple but cozy home bought with my veteran savings. Our routine was solid. I'd spend 3 weeks offshore, then come home for a week, and everything about our family felt rock solid. Sarah worked at the city's accounting office and was always super organized, especially with our finances. Every night while I was on the rig, we'd video call for at least an hour. She'd tell me about her day at work. I'd talk about life at sea. She handled everything at home. Bills, paperwork, maintenance. I never had to worry about a thing. It was the kind of marriage that just worked, where each of us knew our role and played it without drama. In the last few months, Sarah started talking more about improving our financial situation and mentioned she'd been speaking to a financial advisor at work. She said she wanted to reorganize our money to make it work harder, and I thought it was a great idea. After all, she understood numbers way better than I did. Sarah had always been smart with money, so when she suggested a few changes, I trusted her completely. She was my wife. Why wouldn't I? She also started taking better care of herself, hitting the gym, switching up her look with a new hairstyle and trendier clothes. I felt proud seeing her feel good about herself, more confident and energized. Sarah had always been beautiful, and now she looked radiant when she went out with her work friends on the weekends. She deserved to enjoy herself after all the hard work, and I loved seeing her happy. Our video calls got a bit shorter, but I chalked it up to her being tired from work. Sarah said her office was going through a restructuring and she'd been pulling extra hours to help with the transition. When she looked worn out on the calls, I figured it was just normal work stress. She was always dedicated to her career, so it made sense that she was more focused lately. One day, I tried logging into our bank account and found out my password had been changed. When I asked, Sarah explained the bank had rolled out new security measures and she'd updated everything to keep us safer. She said she'd handle all the banking details until I got back from my trip, and I thanked her for being so proactive. It was just like Sarah to think about our financial safety before I even had to worry. During my last week on the rig, Sarah seemed more cheerful than usual during our calls. She talked about some plans she had for when I got back, mentioned wanting to make a few changes around the house, maybe even plan a special vacation. I got excited. After all the time working hard offshore, it sounded amazing to unwind together. She had everything mapped out perfectly, and I couldn't wait to be home. The night before my flight back to Texas, Sarah called earlier than usual. She said she was excited to see me and that there were a few special surprises waiting at home. I laughed and told her I couldn't wait to get back, that I missed her and our little routine. I hung up smiling, thinking how lucky I was to have such a loving and organized wife waiting for me. At 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone buzzed on the nightstand in the rig's sleeping quarters. It was a message from Sarah, and my heart skipped a beat. She never texted me at that hour. I opened WhatsApp expecting an emergency, but what I read froze me to the core. Jake, I can't pretend our marriage is working anymore. I'm moving to Austin with Devin. Attached was a screenshot of our main bank account showing a zero balance, $214,000 just gone. I stared at the screen for about 5 minutes, unable to fully process what was happening. My wife of 12 years had left me by text while I was working in the middle of the ocean. I took 3 deep breaths, just like I learned in military crisis training, and typed a one-word reply. Understood. There was nothing to argue about, nothing to negotiate. She had made every decision without me. I put the phone in the drawer and sat on the edge of the bed staring out at the ocean through the small window. For the next 6 hours, I finished my shift like nothing had happened. Equipment checks, safety reports, team meetings, everything done with my usual precision. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, but no one asked any questions. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the cowardice of how it was done. Sarah had picked the moment when I was most vulnerable and isolated, stuck on a platform in the middle of the ocean. She had planned everything down to the smallest detail, waiting until I was far away to stab me in the back. When I finally got a moment alone, I sat in the quarters trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Sarah hadn't just left me. She had stolen our entire life, our dreams, our future we built together. The silence of the early morning in the middle of the ocean had never felt so deafening. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. I turned off the phone and stared out at the endless horizon of the Gulf of Mexico. Sarah thought she'd left me with nothing, that I'd be lost and helpless without her. She had completely underestimated the man she was married to for 12 years and had no idea she'd messed with the wrong person. That night, while my coworkers slept, I stayed awake, staring at the stars through the tiny window in our cabin. Justice hadn't been served yet, but I knew this story was far from over. Sarah had made her move, but she didn't realize she was dealing with someone who spent 20 years learning military discipline. 2 hours after getting that devastating message, I called my cousin Brendan in Houston. He was an accountant and the only person I completely trusted with financial matters. "Brendan, I need you to activate Protocol Tactical," I said simply, using our emergency code. On the other end of the line, there was a pause, and then he replied, "Understood, Jake. I'll start right away." I didn't need to explain anything. Brendan knew that if I was using that code, something very serious had happened. Over the last 8 years, since I left the military, I had built a protection system that even my wife didn't know about. Like every ex-Marine, I learned it's better to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. Sarah thought she knew all our assets, but she was about to find out she had underestimated the man she married. While Brendan began his initial investigation, I stayed alone in the cabin processing not just the emotional betrayal, but also the scale of the theft. $214,000 doesn't disappear overnight. That takes planning, access, and time. Sarah had systematically removed me from our financial life, and I needed to understand exactly how she had pulled that off. The discipline she used to admire was about to be put into action. An hour later, Brendan called me back with preliminary information that confirmed the situation was worse than I thought. Sarah hadn't just drained our main bank account. There were other suspicious moves that needed to be investigated. "Jake," Brendan said with a steady voice, "this wasn't impulsive. I'll need more time to map it all out." The betrayal ran much deeper than I imagined. I hung up the phone and stared at the endless horizon of the Gulf of Mexico. Sarah thought she had executed the perfect hit, leaving me without resources while I was trapped on a platform. But there was one thing she didn't know, something I had kept an absolute secret through all those years of marriage. Like any good Marine, I always had a contingency plan, and Sarah was about to find out she had messed with the wrong person. Over the past few years, I had learned some important lessons about protection and planning. It was all completely legal, and Sarah never suspected a thing. While she thought she was pulling off the perfect scheme, there were actually a few things she didn't know. Justice hadn't been served yet, but the gears were already starting to turn. And this time, I had certain advantages. That night, while my coworkers slept, I started making a mental list of all the steps I needed to take. First, protect the resources Sarah didn't know about. Second, document everything she had done. Third, prepare a legal response she would never see coming. As a former Marine, I knew the best response doesn't come from anger, but from careful planning and precise execution. At 6 a.m., I called my lawyer in Corpus Christi and said simply, "We need to talk urgently when I get back." I didn't go into detail over the phone, but he could tell from my voice that something serious had happened. Sarah had chosen the rules of the game. But she didn't know she was dealing with someone who spent 2 decades learning discipline. The family she destroyed was about to defend itself in a way she never imagined possible. When I got back to Corpus Christi 2 days later, Brendan was waiting for me at the airport with a folder full of documents and a grim expression. "Jake, this is way worse than we imagined," he said as we got into the car. During the drive to his office, he explained that Sarah hadn't just stolen the $214,000 from our main account, but the most shocking discovery was still to come. Brendan had found evidence that Sarah had secretly changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy, removing my sister and listing herself as the sole beneficiary. "Jake, look at this," he said, showing me a series of messages between Sarah and Devon that he'd obtained through a private investigator. The betrayal wasn't just emotional or financial. It was potentially deadly. Sarah and Devon had planned everything in detail for over a year, including the possibility of eliminating me if I became an obstacle. They had researched offshore rig accidents and discussed accidents that could happen to me at work. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a messy divorce. I was facing a criminal conspiracy involving fraud, identity theft, and potential homicide. Brendan showed me how Sarah had systematically removed me from all our assets over the last 2 years. She had used her accounting knowledge to build a complex web of transfers to disguise the theft. That's when it was time to reveal my own secret, something even Brendan didn't fully know about. Over the last 8 years, since I started working on the rigs as a contractor, I had been diverting 70% of my income into a company called Tactical Holdings LLC. It was completely legal, registered in Delaware, and entirely separate from our marital assets. Brendan was speechless when I showed him Tactical Holdings documents. The company held $1.6 million in liquid assets, diversified investments, and even a few properties Sarah never knew existed. "How did you manage to keep this hidden from her for so long?" he asked, still processing what he was seeing. That discovery completely changed our strategy. We were no longer dealing with just a divorce case. We now had evidence of federal crimes that could lead to decades in prison. Brendan immediately contacted a financial crimes attorney and a federal investigator he knew. That night, as we reviewed all the evidence in his office, I realized Sarah had made a fatal mistake by underestimating the man she married. She thought she knew all my capabilities, but she'd forgotten I spent 2 decades learning how to plan complex operations. The justice she deserved wouldn't come from rage. It would come from cold, calculated truth. 3 weeks later, with all the evidence organized and the legal strategy in place, it was time to launch Operation Cold Return. My lawyer had coordinated everything down to the smallest detail. Sarah and Devon would be caught off guard during their move to Austin. As a former Marine, I knew timing was everything in a successful operation, and we had picked the perfect moment. On Saturday morning, while Sarah and Devon were loading the last boxes into the moving truck, 2 federal officers showed up at the door of our old house. They simultaneously served divorce papers, federal criminal charges, and a court order freezing all hidden accounts. I was watching from a distance, seeing the woman who had been my wife for 12 years realize she had completely underestimated the man she betrayed. Sarah's reaction was exactly what we expected. Total panic, hysterical screaming, and desperate attempts to call lawyers on a Saturday morning. Devon, on the other hand, showed his true colors the moment he grasped the seriousness of the situation. He simply bailed, jumped in his car, and drove off. In a matter of minutes, the woman who thought she'd pulled off the perfect con was alone, broke, and facing federal criminal charges. The most satisfying part was watching all of Sarah's arrogance crumble when she realized I wasn't the helpless victim she had imagined. The officers explained she was being charged with bank fraud, document forgery, and identity theft, crimes that could land her up to 20 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, I stayed out of sight, letting justice speak for me, just like any good Marine would, execute the mission with precision. 2 hours later, Sarah tried calling me dozens of times, sent desperate messages begging to talk like adults, and even showed up at Brendan's house looking for me. But I had learned from the best military training in the world that when you hold the high ground, you never give it up out of emotion. She had chosen to communicate with me by text at 3 a.m. Now she would have to communicate through attorneys. That afternoon, while Sarah scrambled to find a criminal lawyer who would work on a weekend, I was calmly sitting at Brendan's house reviewing Tactical Holdings documents. The irony was delicious. While she thought she was ruining me financially, I was wealthier and freer than I had ever been. Revenge didn't come from anger or hatred. It came from patience, planning, and discipline. The final blow came when Sarah found out Devin hadn't just fled. He had emptied the joint account they'd set up in Austin, leaving her literally penniless. The man she destroyed our marriage for, the one she risked her freedom with, had revealed himself to be exactly what I always knew he was, a coward and an opportunist. Sarah had lost her husband, her money, her boyfriend, and her freedom, all in a single Saturday morning. At 6 p.m., I got a call from my lawyer confirming everything had gone off perfectly. Sarah had been officially served, the accounts were frozen, and the criminal process was underway. Mission accomplished, I thought to myself, using a phrase I had learned in the military. The family she destroyed was finally protected, and justice had been served without me ever having to get my hands dirty. In the days following the execution of Operation Cold Return, Sarah tried to contact me in every way possible. Blocked calls, desperate WhatsApp messages, long emails begging for a chance to explain everything. She even showed up at Brendan's house at 2 a.m., crying and begging him to tell her where I was. But I had learned in the military that when you're in a position of advantage, you never give it up out of emotion. The most pathetic message came on a Tuesday. "Jake, I know I made mistakes, but I still love you. Can we talk like civilized adults?" I stared at the phone screen for a few seconds and typed a 2-word response. "Talk to my lawyer." There was nothing left to say between us. While Sarah scrambled to find criminal lawyers willing to defend her on federal charges, I was calmly putting my new life in order. The irony was delicious. She had tried to leave me with nothing, but it actually freed me from a marriage that had been dead for years. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The weight of all the constant lies had finally lifted from my shoulders. The final blow to Sarah's dignity came when she found out that Devin hadn't just run off. He had completely drained the joint account they'd opened in Austin. The man she destroyed our family for and risked her freedom with had taken the last $23,000 she had saved and vanished without a trace. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my lawyer telling me that Sarah had been formally charged with federal bank fraud, document forgery, and identity theft. The evidence was so solid that the prosecutor was only offering a plea deal with 18 months in federal prison. "She's desperate to make a deal," my lawyer said. "Wants to know if you'd accept a formal apology in exchange for a lighter sentence recommendation." My answer was simple and direct. No. My answer was simple and direct. No. Sarah had made her choices, planned every move, and now she'd have to face the consequences on her own. Justice wasn't about personal revenge. It was about accountability. She had tried to destroy my life in a calculated, cold-blooded way. That week I started preparing to move to Montana, where I had bought a small ranch through Tactical Holdings years ago. It was a secluded place, surrounded by mountains, where I could finally have the peace I'd always wanted. Sarah thought she knew all my plans and resources, but she never knew about my dream of retiring early in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, far away from all the lies and manipulation. The last message I got from Sarah came the night before my move. "Jake, I never wanted things to end like this. You were always a good man and I ruined everything." I read the message, deleted it without replying, and blocked the number for good. The woman who was my wife for 12 years died to me the moment she chose to betray me. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my cabin in Montana, watching the sun set behind the snow-covered mountains. Moving here had been the best decision I'd made in years, far from the noise, the lies, and all the phoniness that had taken over my life. Tactical Holdings allowed me to retire at 45, something Sarah never imagined was possible. For the first time in decades, I woke up every day with no rush, no stress, just the peace I had always searched for. My routine was simple: breakfast at 6 a.m., A walk around the property, cabin maintenance, and afternoon reading. No more 3 a.m. video calls, no more lies to decipher, no more stress to process. The military discipline I'd learned over 20 years was now applied to building a calm and genuine life. One Tuesday morning, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a woman named Jennifer in Houston, who had read about my case in the local papers. She wrote, "Mr. Thompson, I want to thank you for exposing your ex-wife's crimes. She had tried to pull the same scam on my brother, but when the investigators saw your case, they were able to protect him in time. You saved our family from financial devastation." I read the letter 3 times, realizing that something good had come out of all that pain. In those moments of absolute silence, when the wind rustled through the pines and I could hear nothing but my own thoughts, I understood that the whole experience had taught me something valuable. Justice doesn't always come the way we expect, but it always comes to those who have the patience and discipline to wait for it. Sarah had tried to destroy me, but she had actually freed me to live the life I always wanted. Sometimes I thought about the Jake from a year ago, working on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, blindly trusting a wife who was plotting his downfall. That man died in the early hours of a Tuesday, when he got a cold, calculated text message. The man I am now was born from discipline, patience, and the truth that triumphed over impulse. Some afternoons when the silence grew especially deep, I'd look at that letter from Jennifer and remember that something good had come from all of it. My pain had protected other families. My experience had served as a lesson. My discipline had proven that it's possible to win without sinking to the level of those who hurt us. True strength doesn't shout. It simply shows up when you're patient enough to let it do its work. Today, when I look at the mountains of Montana and feel the fresh air fill my lungs, I know I made the right choices. Sarah is serving her sentence. Devin has vanished from the face of the earth, and I'm living the life I always dreamed of. What should have destroyed me ended up setting me free to be who I really am. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are exactly what we need to find our true strength. The cabin gets quiet when night falls, but it's a different kind of silence than what I used to feel on the oil rig. This is the silence of earned peace, fulfilled truth, a life rebuilt on solid ground. When I close my eyes at night, I no longer think about resentment or regret. I think only of gratitude for discovering that even in the darkest moments, there's always a light waiting for us on the other side. Looking back, I realize that my story teaches something fundamental about human nature and justice. Sometimes the people we trust the most are capable of the deepest betrayals, but that doesn't mean we should become bitter or vengeful. I could have reacted with anger, violence, or despair, but I chose the path of discipline and patience. My strength didn't come from muscle or aggression. It came from staying calm while everything around me was falling apart. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for sticking with my story to the end. It shows that you truly connected with what I went through. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think I did the right thing? Would you have done the same, or chosen a different path? And if you have your own story of betrayal, injustice, or resilience that you'd like to share, tell us in the comments. Make sure to hit the like button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. Every week I share real stories of men who turned their pain into power, and your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today to find their strength.